Okay, so for painting our color wheel, we are going to use only our primary colors. So this is my blue, this is my yellow, this is my red. And so I'm going to activate those 3 colors, because for this project, we want to create the entire thing with just our primary colors. Make sure when you're activating, you don't activate purple on accident, because purple and blue in watercolors in a watercolor tray, they often look the same. I like to use this little dropper here, and then I put just enough water to cover the paint but not overflow the well, okay? And then you're gonna want your colors, your primary colors, evenly spaced. So you can pick any one that you want to go first. I generally do red. I just like it that way, but activate your paint up real good. And then we're just gonna come in, and I like to put red at the top. It doesn't really matter where you wanna put it, but just paint your triangle here in the red color. And what I like to do is kind of get it on there relatively quickly so that it's still kind of wet all over. And then I can add color to the wet if I want it darker. But to be honest, when you're painting or creating the color wheel, it's easier to create the color wheel over the paint if you don't get the paint too thick. So just leave it a little bit watery. It's watercolor. It's kind of what it's meant to. But if I was to want to darken it up, I could come in and try to get a little more paint. The longer the water sits on my paint, the more it'll activate. But I can drop in color and I can start to darken it up if I were to want to, and just start to spread that back around as well. So now between colors, of course, wash your brush really thoroughly. Check on your paper towel that you don't have red paint coming off, and then we can switch colors. So as I come around, we're gonna want this evenly spaced now, right? So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, this can be yellow. 1, 2, 3, 4, this can be blue. 1, 2, 3, 4, we're at red, right? So I touched that. I didn't really want to. So 1, 2, 3 blank spaces. On the 4th one, I'm gonna add yellow. And I'm just gonna paint it the exact same way that I painted red. Just try to cover the triangle as accurately as I can, relatively quickly, so that the entire pie shape is still wet when I finish. So if I wanna darken it, I can. I also encourage you guys, when you're painting or drawing or whatever, turn your paper, get in the habit of turning your paper rather than your hand. You'll be more accurate. Even if that means you have to kind of move your paint around a little bit and your water or whatever, just move your paper. Get in the habit of moving your paper. Okay, that's pretty bright. I'm pretty happy with that. Rinse my brush. Now I have a little bit of red pooling, so if I dry my brush off really good and I just sort of move that around without adding more water, I can also lift it a little bit if I'm using a dry brush, so that it looks smooth. Again, rinse before touching another color, but now we're gonna go on to blue. So, you know, we had 3 here, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the one we want for our blue. And again, try to get it on as quickly and as accurately as we can. When you are working with watercolor, the pressure on your brush should be very, very light. Your bristles should barely be bending, if they're bending really at all. If you're having to go like this and really scrape on the paint, you don't have enough water. So please add water rather than totally scrunching and putting a ton of pressure on the bristles of the brush and scraping it across your paper. Add a little more water. It should be fluid. It should flow as you're putting it on. Now in the center here, when you are bringing it into the center, don't let your colors touch each other, because as long as they are wet, if they touch each other, they'll kind of go and they'll wick together, and they'll bleed into each other, right? And make colors, which is what we are going to make, secondary colors, but we don't want them mixing unintentionally. We're going to intentionally mix our secondary colors where they belong and not a big glob in the middle. Okay. So this is our primary colors. And then, you know, ideally it'd be nice if you could let these dry overnight or whatever until they're thoroughly dry, and then do your secondary colors. But we're going to go ahead and do ours right away. But when I'm doing these while they are wet, I'm going to leave a little tiny border of dry. Okay, so I'm not going to let my wet paint touch this wet paint on either side, vice versa, because I don't want them to bleed together. Then once they thoroughly dry, we're going to go over and do a wash over where the tertiary colors will be, and we'll be able to sort of blend that dry border and get rid of it at that time. So for now, what we're going to do this whole section, all three triangle pieces are going to be orange. We're going to take yellow, we're going to paint yellow on here, get it quick so it's wet all over the whole thing, and then we'll drop in some red and we will start moving that color around to mix up orange. Okay, we're going to do yellow first because it is lighter. Red overpowers yellow very, very quick. Okay, now like I said, keep a small little border. The smaller you can go, the easier it will be to patch, but again, you don't want it to touch anywhere or it's going to wick color. And even along the yellow side, because we are going to add red in and make orange, and we want to keep this yellow, you know, pure and yellow, so we don't want it to touch even on this side. So just keep a nice little thin border. Again, we're trying to get this on as quick as we can so that it stays wet. Oof, try not to drip. We don't want it outside of the lines. I just dripped. Again, on as quick as we can so that it stays wet. And you'll notice as I start having it not be real wet, I get more. I don't just keep scraping it across the paper. I want it nice and glossy and wet. It will mix easier this way, right? Okay, then I'm going to rinse all the yellow out of my brush because I don't want to get yellow into the red on the paint tray. And then I'm going to get some red into my brush. And then I like to start with about 2 drops per triangle here. Rinse my brush real good, and then just start moving the red through the yellow and blending and mixing. And I like to kind of get those dots mixed away pretty quick, or they start to go like sink down into the paper and stain the paper, and you'll end up with these darker spots in your orange. So if you can get them moving right away and then kind of go back and get them evenly dispersed or mixed, that's works a little better, I find. And then if I feel like my orange isn't quite dark enough, rinse my brush because I don't want to put orange in my red, but I can come in and I can get a little more red And I could drop in a couple more drops depending how much more dark I want this to be. But again, move those drops right away so they don't start to stain. And start mixing them into the yellow. And again, my paint should be wet enough that I'm not having to put a bunch of pressure on my brush and mutilate my bristles by smearing it across the paper trying to mix paint. It should be wet enough that I barely need any pressure and I'm just kind of pushing this paint around in the water. And I'm creating orange. Okay, once you have all the orange mixed, make sure all your edges are clean and smooth. Again, keep your borders there. We'll fix the borders in the next video. For now, they'll stay like this. Okay, so now we have our orange. Again, if you feel it's not dark enough, add a little more red. If you feel it's too dark, you know, lift it a little and add some yellow. That's fine, whatever, until you're happy with it. I'm happy with this because, again, I think that when you start adding the design on the color wheel, the light, airy, watery color is better and easier than, you know, thick, glossy, too much paint. Okay, kind of smooth that out. All right, so I'm gonna rotate around over to here, and now in between these, I'm going to mix the colors that flank this section. So it'll be yellow and it'll be blue, which will turn green. And again, yellow's lighter, blue will overpower yellow, so I put the yellow on first. And it's same process, get it on there, leave a bit of a border. I like to kind of put my borders in first and then start putting the color on as quick as I can, okay? So we'll get a little border going right here. Almost rinsed my brush, don't need to rinse my brush. However, if I'm starting to get not, you know, want a little water added to my yellow, I can use the brush or the dropper to do that. I find the dropper just quicker and easier, I like it. If your water starts to get too colored, you'll want to change it so that you're not putting in color and messing up your palette here. My water's borderline, but it's okay. And if it's getting dark, but I still need water, I can just use plain water to move it around. If it's getting light, dry your brush off, pick up more paint, and add it to the water, okay? Now, I'm gonna rinse the yellow out really good, and I'm gonna start dropping in my blue. Let's get some blue on my brush. Just add a couple drops per triangle. Always rinse the excess paint out of my brush and then start moving these around. Again, get those dots moving quick so that they aren't staining your paper and you have this darker blue spots in your green. And then your paint should be wet enough that you can just start moving that water around or that blue around inside that yellow. Real easy. Just sort of flows through. Again, if you feel like you need more of one color or another, you can add it. And then I'm going to come along the edge and make sure the edge is real clean, looks real good and green. No little yellow sections sticking out. Same here on my edges where my border is. I don't worry about those until I've already mixed the green. And then I go through and clean that up just so that I'm cleaning it up with green and I'm not wasting time while my paint is drying and I'm supposed to be mixing. Okay, now I have my green and I'm gonna turn it because now we're gonna do this section And you guessed it, we're going to mix red and blue here and create our purple. Now, blue will overshadow red, so I'm gonna do red first. Again, I'm gonna come in and create that border edge quickly. First thing. I do not want to drip on your paper because that makes for a messy artwork. I'm causing all kinds of problems here. I'm gonna try and lift that. Oh, I touched the wet. Now let's see, you can see it's starting to run. Patching real quick. Sorry, don't mind me. I'm making a huge mess today. Try not to make a huge mess. I guess you guys seeing me patch is probably beneficial because probably some of you will make a mess too. Okay, so I got that to stop running and I'm gonna stop messing with it until it dries, and I'll patch all that after it's dry. But I do want a nice clean water brush only. I'm gonna try and get that, lift this a little bit. So it's not so obvious. Okay, back to what we were doing. Again, be very careful. We do not want to drip or splatter on our work here, because the messiness is not the goal. So my water has been sitting in my paint longer now, so my color is obviously brighter. So instead of keep getting paint from here, I'll just get some more water and start spreading it around with water only. Okay, now I'm gonna come through and drop in my blue. Rinse my brush really good. Start moving that around. So I'm getting some purple, but I kind of want it a little more purple. So I'm gonna rinse my brush, get a little bit more blue. Start moving that around real good. And then I'll start coming through and trying to clean up my edges. I'm still leaving that border. I still want that dry spot there. We can't patch that until all our colors are dry. I'm gonna come along and clean up this edge. I don't really want puddles to form too much because that creates a really opaque, thick, shiny spot in my paint. So I'm just kind of moving it around as it dries a little bit. Spread it out. Okay, so now we have our primaries and our secondaries, and they need to all dry really good, and then we can create our tertiaries. We're gonna do sort of a wet, watery red wash over this pie piece to create the red purple color, and a blue one to create the blue purple color, and we'll do the same thing all the way around. So we'll do that in the next video. Right now we're gonna let this dry overnight.